Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Phil Johnson with us. For the past 21 years, Phil has been dedicated to helping executives and organizations bet on themselves for developing their emotional intelligence. The Master of Business Leadership program, which he founded, offers its members the potential for an extraordinary life filled with exponential impact and success rather than a conventional level of success. Phil, it's so great to have you on the show.
Stefan, it's great to be here. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. So let's first of all talk a bit about your origin story. How did you end up doing what you do?
It goes back to my birth. I was born with dyslexia. I didn't realize I had dyslexia until I was about 35 years old because there was no such thing as dyslexia or ADHD in those days. But it forced me, because my brain doesn't work the way most people's brains work, it forced me to do a lot of what I refer to now as emotional labor. And that helped to give me insights into myself and other people that prepared me for the work I've been doing for the last 21 years. Along the way, I took a 20-year sabbatical into the semiconductor industry. So I was an executive in the semiconductor industry before I left that to do what I'm doing today.
So, what would be an example of a life changing experience for you and a life changing experience for one of your students or clients? You don't have to be from the same scenario, but I'm just curious to hear. I've been doing this for a long time with 21 years. So I'm sure there's some milestone moments that stick out for you?
Yeah, for me, I got on this path in January of 1968, a month after my mother died of breast cancer. And I really committed to doing this type of work, and I've really been on this path ever since. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, there's been lots of milestone moments for people that have gone through the MBL program. Everybody that goes through the program develops a greater sense of awareness of what's going on in them and around them. As they're going through the program, at some point it really hits them how powerful the development of their emotional intelligence is, and how it really multiplies their results and their effectiveness. I asked them if there's anything I could have said to them at the beginning that could have prepared them for what they know now. Everybody always says no. Because the development of emotional intelligence is an experiential process, it's not an intellectual process. It always requires an initial leap of faith. That faith is usually driven by an urgent desire for better results than they're currently getting. There's no magic words that can help people understand the value and importance of developing their emotional intelligence prior to beginning the journey.
So, what does emotional intelligence mean for you? And this is a term that was popularized not too long ago, and before that, I don't know that that was really even a thing, right? It was IQ, but there wasn't EQ until I forget the guy's name who came up with it, but
Goldman, Goldman,
that
Daniel Goldman.
Goldman, yeah. So, when you think about emotional intelligence, what are some examples or some hypothetical, anecdotal explanations that help somebody to wrap their head around? Oh, that's what emotional intelligence is versus intellect or common sense or being a good person.
It always begins, the journey begins with you have to develop an emotional connection to a desired result that's greater than the fear that's going to get generated in you when you leave your comfort zone to start moving in that direction. That's what I call the fuel for the journey. That's the starting point. What happens is whenever we take an action that moves us outside of our comfort zone, there's a part of our lizard brain that doesn't want us to do that. And it secretes a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes us to go into what psychologists often refer to as an amygdala hijack. We would fight, flight, or freeze mode, and often say and do things we later regret. But when we're in the grip of the hijack, we're not really conscious, we're reacting. The development of our emotional intelligence enables us to feel the fear and anxiety that gets triggered in us when we leave our comfort zone and move through it, as opposed to allowing that fear to keep us trapped in our comfort zone. So that's what I refer to as emotional labor.
When you're talking about moving through the fear and anxiety, that reminds me of a book that was very helpful to me. It was called The Tools. It's written by two psychologists or psychiatrists. I forget, one or the other. Anyway, so they have these 5 tools that in their practice, they changed outcomes for people very quickly, got them the outcomes that they were after. They didn't have to go through years or decades even of talk therapy. They got almost instant major result by using these tools. And this is the first tool of the 5. Visualize the fear that you're facing as a cloud of dust, like black specks, amorphous black cloud, and you're going to run towards it and through it. Example story that the co-author shared about this, his high school buddy, when they were both in high school, was an incredible athlete, football player who was recognized throughout the state. He shared with his friend, the person who ended up being the co-author of this book, his secret to success. Because he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest. What he did, though, was as soon as he got on the playing field, he would go straight to getting tackled, like as much as possible, just get pummeled. That was the first thing that he would do, and then he became invincible for the rest of the game. So he went straight to the fear. And so that was the inspiration for this exercise, to visualize the fear in your mind's eye and in your imagination as this cloud that you could just run through, and out the other side of. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're describing is the journey to emotional intelligence, inspirational leadership, higher consciousness, and remarkable results. That's the emotional, what you're describing is the emotional labor that is the only way of achieving those kinds of results. We all have to do our own emotional labor of feeling and moving through our fear in order to achieve better results, because what's on the other side of that fear is success. So yeah, it's actually without the without a strong reason, without a strong emotional connection to a desired result that we want to achieve. We may want better results than we're currently getting, but we will not be willing to do the emotional labor that you're describing in order to achieve those results. And quite frankly, most people aren't. And that's why the current level of employee engagement, according to Gallup, globally is around 13%. Low levels of employee and customer engagement are costing the US economy over $1 trillion a year alone. And there's almost a one-to-one correlation between the level of employee engagement and the level of customer engagement. So if your employees don't feel safe, if they don't feel engaged, then neither do your customers. It's a huge problem. If you're not willing to do the kind of work you describe, if you're not willing to do that kind of emotional labor, the only other alternative you have is to try and use some type of position-based power to control and manipulate others to get them to change. And quite frankly, and it doesn't work, by the way, but that's what we've been trying to do for a very, very, very long time. It just creates increasing levels of toxicity, increasing levels of drama, chaos, and conflict. The thing to really highlight the importance of the development of emotional intelligence is that we're facing a tsunami of change with a 500 million-year-old brain that doesn't like change. So some scientists estimate that in this century we could experience the equivalent of roughly 20,000 years worth of change, or 200 centuries worth of change. In this decade, we will experience roughly 100 years worth of change. Here's an analogy. If you think of your amygdala, that part of our little lizard brain that secretes the cortisol into our bloodstream that causes those amygdala hijacks. If you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or big sister to quiet that amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that change always triggers in us and move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve rather than allowing that fear to keep us stuck in our comfort zone. So that's why more and more companies, I can give you an example of a company that's doing over $1 trillion a year in revenue, and their primary hiring focus is on the search for people with above average levels of emotional intelligence. And that company is Apple. That's why when you walk into an Apple store, that energy you feel is an example of a more emotionally intelligent environment. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to understand your pain and, if possible, offer a solution. They want you to have a great experience. Whether you buy anything or not is secondary to their desire to want to serve you. And maybe you'll go tell your friends, and they'll tell you, they'll tell their friends. Funny enough, this morning I happened to be in an Apple store, and I wanted to get a battery changed on my iPhone. But I was talking with one of the folks in there, and I said, "How long have you been working here?" He said, "A month and a half." And I said, "Can you tell me in your interview process how much of that?" And he had several interview steps. What do you think was targeted on the development of your emotional intelligence? And he said over 40%. He said there was little focus, his product knowledge. As a matter of fact, he came from a fast food industry. Almost the entire interview process was on assessing his level of emotional intelligence. And that's why the energy you
Yeah.
feel when you walk into a store is a very different energy from the energy of the stores surrounding it. To a large extent, because of the accelerating rate of global change and the fact that we have a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change, the development of our emotional intelligence represents the future of organizational development. And as you say, it's harder than hell to do if you don't have a strong emotional connection to a desired result you want to achieve. You won't be willing to run through the fog.
So, what's an example of an emotional connection that you've developed to a desired result and you've been able to achieve it? And maybe an example where you couldn't get the desired result even though you had an emotional connection to it.
I was born with dyslexia, failed grade 3 and I failed grade 5. I started working when I was 9 years old, pulling copper out of the back of factory dumpsters and selling it for 5 cents a pound. That was my allowance. After my mother died in December of 1967, I dedicated myself to being on the path I've been on for the last 54 years. I became an A student throughout the rest of grade school and high school. I was an A student throughout university, went on to study electrical engineering, and spent 20 years in the semiconductor industry, traveling 60,000 miles a year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim, and generated over $1.5 billion of revenue. All of that took several different emotional connections that I had to a desired result that was greater than my fear. And I can tell you, there's lots of times I was scared to death during that journey, but I kept the connection, I kept the focus to why I was doing what I was doing. And that emotional connection was stronger than my fear. And the results verify that. It wasn't one
You,
vision, it was many visions over a lifetime. And I'm 68 today.
you talk a lot about emotional intelligence and emotional connection. What about spiritual intelligence? What about a
Absolutely.
spiritual connection to a desired result? How is that different or how is it the same to what you have been talking about?
Spiritual aspect is really the superset of our ability to do intellectual labor and our emotional intelligence. The combination of those two things, the reason we're able to achieve remarkable results when we add emotional intelligence to intellectual intelligence is it connects us with our divinity. It connects us with our genius. It helps us to lower our walls. We become less resistive, less judgmental, less attached to outcome. And the leadership that creates in us inspires others to follow our example for themselves. Spiritual intelligence is at the heart of all of this. Gold standard for authentic emotional intelligence is Christ. The journey to the development of emotional intelligence and the emotional labor required is exactly what he asked us to do. He said, pick up your cross and follow me. Pick up my cross. I'm going to show you the way. But you have to do this for yourself. You have to bet on yourself by developing a passion around a desired result that motivates you to move through the fear and the anxiety that you will face on the way to achieving that result. And that's the journey that all of us are called to do. That's the journey that all of us are called to undertake. But up until now, there's only been a very small percentage of the population that have been willing to do that type of emotional labor. But because of the accelerating rate of global change we're facing with the 500 million year old brain, it doesn't like change. We're being torn out of our comfort zones. We're being forced to move through the fear and anxiety that's creating in us. If we're not willing to do that work, if we're not willing to go through that veil of fear, if we don't have that level of motivation to do what Christ asked us to do, what he commanded us to do, then we're going to fall deeper and deeper into our comfort zones. And our world is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as we become more resistive, more judgmental, more attached to outcome. So we're really at a tipping point as a species. We need to change our trajectory dramatically in the next few decades at most. Quite frankly, there isn't a single other species on the planet that wouldn't be better off if we didn't exist. We're the virus on the planet, and we need to change that. And our spirituality, the development, connection with our spirituality, connection with our divinity through the development of our emotional intelligence is the path to doing that. And it will not be easy. It has never been easy. But the results, the ROI from doing the work that's required is incredible. Here's an analogy. Here's an analogy between the difference between IQ and EQ. IQ is somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Now think of EQ as a penny that doubles in value every day for 31 days. So day one, you've got a penny. Day two, you've got two pennies. Day 31, you've got $10.7 million. Day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. So whereas not everybody can have 160 IQ, our ability to do intellectual labor is genetic. If you have a high IQ, your parents had a high IQ, their parents had a high IQ, and you inherited those genes. That's fixed genetically. Anybody, everybody can develop their emotional intelligence. And the ROI far surpasses our ability to do intellectual labor. As a matter of fact, there was a 40-year study done at UC Berkeley comparing IQ with EQ, and they determined that EQ was 400% more valuable than IQ in determining success. And I think that number's low, but even if we go with that, we get an idea of the massive value and importance of doing the emotional labor required to develop our emotional intelligence. And that's the gateway to our spiritual intelligence.
Have you had a spiritual awakening that brought you to this realization, or has it just been kind of slow and steady wins the race?
No, this hit me like a bolt between the eyes about 15 years ago. This 54-year path I've been on. I actually asked Christ to be able to do this work a month after my mother died in 1968, in January 1968. And I didn't realize until about 15 years ago that he gave me everything I asked for. And he even gave it to me before I asked for it. My being born with dyslexia has been a great help for me in being able to do what I do today in the service of helping others. What I do today comes full circle with the promise I made 54 years ago, and I am amazed and incredibly grateful. So this to me is, if I ever needed any proof, I got it a long time ago.
And what if somebody needs the proof? What do you offer them in that regards? I've come across a lot of skeptics in my day, so I was one of them up until age 42.
And that's, you do the work, you get the proof. You do the work, you get the proof. You develop the awareness, the consciousness of what's going on in you and around you that leads you, that also connects you with your spirituality, your divinity, your genius. It's always been there. It's always, it'll always be there. It's buried beneath our fear. And the only way we connect with it is by learning to move through our fear. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is never going to go away, but it's something we need to acknowledge and move through as opposed to allowing that fear to control us.
Well, there's a great book by Susan Jeffers called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways."
There's a couple of things I want to say here. We're only conscious about 3 to 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're relying on our unconscious habits to determine our behavior and our results. Whatever results we're getting in our life is a reflection of our current level of consciousness. We cannot get better results with our current level of consciousness. In order for us to get better results, we have to raise our level of consciousness. And we do that by learning to stop giving away our energy. And I've been proving this all over the world. I've coached people running multi-billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees and Harvard MBAs and PhDs, and I've been a doctoral faculty advisor to folks going through organizational and emotional intelligence doctorates. There's an underlying energy physics to all of this that makes the results of going through this process as predictable and quantifiable as any physical science. A lot of the habits we develop from birth are habits that cause us to unconsciously give away our energy. And we do it in a myriad of ways. We do it in how we communicate, listen, take responsibility, make decisions, all sorts of ways. But when we give away our energy, it creates an energy deficit in us. So at the same time we're giving away our energy over here, we have to be replacing that energy by trying to steal energy from other people over here. And that dynamic is going on inside of everybody all the time. So in the ABL and the Master of Business Leadership program, I show people how they're unconsciously giving away their energy. And I give them better habits to practice to stop doing that. And when they stop giving away their energy, the need to steal the energy of other people goes away because they don't need it. And it's in that process, it's in that journey that you develop a higher level of consciousness. You develop your emotional intelligence. You become a more inspirational leader that people want to follow, and you generate remarkable results. So the outcomes of doing this very difficult emotional labor are incredible. They're amazing.
You mentioned earlier that there's what 13% of level of employee engagement,
Engagement.
and I'm curious to hear what the strategies are that someone can implement right now from this listening to this episode that will help them increase their employee engagement and their customer engagement besides just generalities like work on being emotionally intelligent and acting with loving kindness, all that.
Here's an example. This is actually the second MBL habit called authentic listening. The key to authentic listening is not to take anything personally. How somebody feels about you has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on inside of them. But if how you feel about yourself is based on how somebody else feels about you, who's running your life? You or them? They are, right? You're giving away your
Mhm.
energy unconsciously to them to determine how you should feel about yourself. If they like you, you like you. If they don't like you, you don't like you. What I've described is all of social media. People bend over backwards, giving away their energy to try and get people to like them. That's just one example of how people are giving away their energy. And when, as I say, when they're giving away their energy, they have to be replacing that energy by trying to control and manipulate others to steal their energy. So it's both of those things are going on at the same time. So when you stop giving away your energy, this stops as well.
You're alluding to some principles that are in the Master of Business Leadership program that you've created. How many principles are there in MBL, and how extensive is the curriculum?
There's about 10 different habits that I talk about and coach people through during the program. Initially, it's 16 weeks where we get together an hour a week for 4 months. But there are executives and organizations I've been working with for over 13 years because the ROI keeps getting greater and greater as they move towards mastery of these habits and principles. So the results start to get better immediately, but the ROI never ends. The longer you practice these habits, the more you work towards ingraining them, mastering them, the better your results.
Which is your favorite habit of MBL?
Present.
Hmm.
Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is where we get to choose our response. And our ability to choose is our greatest gift and power, our ability to choose our response. Most of us are driven by ego based fear. Most of us identify with our egos. Our egos never want us to be in the present moment. Our egos want us to feel greater than or less than, but never equal to. The present moment is all that exists. The present moment is all that will ever exist. There will never be a future moment. There is no past moment. We share with everybody on the planet. The present moment is this present moment is the only time we can take an action and generate a result. When we allow our egos to control us, we don't want to spend any time in the present moment. We want to get out of the present moment into some mystical future moment or be controlled by some past moment. As we move towards greater consciousness, as we move towards enlightenment, we recognize that all there ever will be is the present moment. There's an old Zen saying, thousands of years old, that says, you probably have heard it, before enlightenment, chop wouldn't carry water. After enlightenment, chop wouldn't carry water. What that means is that what you do doesn't change as you move towards enlightenment, but the meaning behind what you do, the presence with which you do it changes. So you're being in the moment. And the more in the moment you are, the more influential you are. The more present you are, the more influential you are. As a matter of fact, getting back to your kind of football story, we spend over $4 trillion a year globally trying to be in the present moment, called being in a state of flow, where we can shut off that yap yap voice in the back of our mind that's running 24/7 and be more present. That's why football players bang their helmets together. They're trying to stop thinking. That's why Michael Jordan played basketball as long as he did, because he always said the game had something to teach him, meaning that when he was playing the game, he was not thinking. I guarantee you, he couldn't have told you at any moment during the game when he was going to pass, shoot, or dribble. He was in the flow with the present moment. And every mammal on the planet tries to get in that flow. So being present as much as I can in this moment, I think is the whole key of our existence. To be able to take the challenges we face as opportunities to become more present in each moment.
So, what would be an example of being present in a work environment, either as a boss or an employee? How that might not fit the traditional culture of work.
So there's a lot of fear and anxiety, a lot of toxicity in most organizations. And if you don't take on that toxicity, if you don't take on that fear, if you remain present, it confuses the people around you initially. They eventually start to want to know how you're able to do that. I'm working with one company working on a global change initiative. People that are using the skills more and more are standing out as the inspiration of leaders within the organization because they're not allowing the fear that change triggers in them to stop them from being present. So in most organizations, there's a lot of anxiety. There's burnout. We're seeing it every day. And that's really a lack of emotional intelligence. That's really people allowing their fear to control them.
Have you suffered any burnout? What did you do at that time to get through it? And what would you do differently if you knew then what you know now?
I wouldn't do anything differently because what I did then has brought me to where I am today. And I'm very pleased with where I am today. That was all part of the learning process. But I reminded myself of the emotional connection to the commitment that I made that's driven my life for the last 54 years. I mean, there's nothing that I would rather be doing with my life's energy than what I do today. There's nothing that I would rather be doing than to help people develop their emotional intelligence and obtain better results and inspire others to do the same. I can't think of a better reason to get up in the morning.
If you were to have a conversation with one of your clients about their purpose in life, their spiritual mission, let's say that they're struggling to figure out what that life purpose is, how would you help them to get through that so they have the clarity and the sense of direction and certainty that gets them up and excited in the morning and not just wondering, am I wasting my life?
It's a journey where you use your passion, where you use your energy level as kind of a compass to know if what you're doing is moving you towards what living and working on purpose means for you or away from it. So, although we all go through life in the dark, we can use our energy level as that compass that can guide us to that kind of through line in our life represents our purpose. And by the way, when we're living and working on purpose, that's our greatest source of wealth, where people will pay us the most shiny beads, because that's really why money was invented as a way of moving wealth around. And by moving towards your distinctive value, your market becomes global because nobody can do a better job of being you than you. You've got the global franchise. It's a matter of learning to let go, to stop giving away our energy, to learn to become less resistant, less judgmental, less attached to outcome, so that we can be more fully present in this moment. That's how we reconnect with what we're here to do, how we can best serve. And it's a journey. For me, actually, it took 17 years. I actually talk about this in the Master Business Leadership program. I followed exactly that path. By 2007, I think I started in 1990, yeah. And by 2007, I was doing less than a half of 1% of the number of activities I do today. So over time, I moved away from things that I didn't like doing, that didn't energize me, and more towards the things that represented how I could best demonstrate love. It took me 17 years. So that's been my focus ever since.
How often do you think about your mortality?
Not at all,
Not at all. Okay.
because and let me explain. This may give your listeners pause to reflect on what I'm about to say. We're not living life. We are life. We don't die. The body we inhabit, the body that our energy habits, has a shelf life. As a matter of fact, every cell in our body dies and is replaced at least once in every 7-year period. There isn't a single brain cell, muscle, bone, heart. There isn't a single cell in your body that was there 7 years ago, yet you remain. How can that be? It's because you are the energy that gives your body life. And when your body ceases to exist, the energy that is you simply leaves your body. Every cell in your body is vibrating at exactly the same frequency. That's kind of like your social insurance number in the universe. Nobody else is vibrating at your frequency. That frequency is who you are. That energy is who you are. I believe, quite frankly, the reason we're here, the reason our energy inhabits our body, is so that we can take the challenges we face as opportunities to raise our level of consciousness by learning to face those challenges without giving away our energy, by learning to face those challenges with our walls down, by coming from love as opposed to fear. And I think that that's the whole purpose of our existence in this physical form. So we are not living a life. We are life living for a brief period of time in a physical form. But we are so much more than we can possibly imagine. We cannot conceive intellectually how much we are.
Have you glimpsed that?
Maybe a little bit, but I don't have any illusions about how little I know. I think we're still much closer to Neanderthals in our evolution than we think we are. I think we have a long, long way to go. As I say, I think we're at a tipping point because of the accelerated rate of global change and the fact that we don't like change. Both there's both biological and sociological resistance we have to change. We have to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to navigate our way through the fear and anxiety that's going to trigger in us increasingly. So we're either going to go one way or the other. We can go penny doubling in a positive direction or penny doubling in a negative direction. But one of those two things is going to happen at an accelerating rate.
If you could just go back in time to when you started your business or this program. Also, I guess maybe even back to when you lost your mother to breast cancer. What would be the gifts, the silver lining that you might not have seen back then that you see now, and so you wouldn't change a thing about what happened because it was all for the good? Is there any insight that you got from the additional years of perspective?
We're all doing the best we can based on our current level of consciousness. So I know my dad, my mom, my brothers, all of us, we're all doing the best we can based on our current level of awareness, based on our current level of consciousness. But we need to evolve so that our ego doesn't control us. We live in an environment where we're bombarded with fear messaging daily. And it's quite frankly, we've been enslaved by our fear. The development of our emotional intelligence is the gateway to freedom from fear. It's the gateway to agency. And I believe that's why that's the real purpose of our being here.
Awesome. Now, if our listener is interested in your Master Business Leadership Program, going through it themselves or sending somebody through it, maybe on their team, or just learning from you, following you on social media, reading your insights and so forth, where should they go?
I'll give you a link to my Zoom calendar. I'd be happy to meet with and chat with anybody that would like to talk with me. I'll also give you a link to I have an emotional intelligence newsletter I published on LinkedIn on a daily basis. There's over 200 episodes so far, so they're welcome to subscribe to that. It's free. Maybe there'll be something of value there that they can get from it. But I'd be happy to meet with anybody that would like to have a conversation.
And you also have a podcast, right? The Master Business Leadership Podcast.
Podcast, written lots of books, lots of articles. We haven't published, got over 200 episodes, but we haven't published a new one for about a year and a half. We kind of put it on the back burner because of COVID, and we haven't really taken it up again. So I've been on about 70 podcasts as a guest since January of this year, talking about the value and importance of emotional intelligence. So my focus is really helping people to become more conscious of the importance of developing their emotional intelligence, betting on themselves.
I am very grateful for you to have come on the show and shared your amazing journey and all the lessons learned and everything. So I will share those links in the show notes for this episode. And listener, I hope that you take advantage of this opportunity to learn and grow and try something outside of your comfort zone build your emotional intelligence, work out like you're going to the gym, but on your emotional intelligence. And we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.